Welcome to my presentation on Joseph LeDoux, one of the leading neuroscientists. My name is Christine King, student of Goethe University. In this presentation, I will start with an introduction, followed by an overview of LeDoux's work, main lines of research, bibliometric analysis, and then I will discuss in more detail a highly cited article and a recent publication, finishing with discussion and conclusion. I want to start with a personal detail from LeDoux's life. He was born in 1949 in Louisiana, United States. LeDoux has a lifelong interest in music and played in bands since high school. His current band is called the Amygdaloids. Some of his songs are called How Free Is Your Will, Mind Over Matter, Fearing. I thought this must reflect his passion for his profession. But LeDoux is best known for his research on fear, where he uses classical fear conditioning. He discovered the role of the amygdala in fear processing. I got interested in him because I believed his work is especially important for improving treatments of fear-related disorders like anxiety, which is a rising problem in our modern world. My aim in this presentation is to show how LeDoux has revolutionized emotional research. I will give you an overview of his career. In 1974, LeDoux received his master's degree in marketing and psychology. In 1977, he received a PhD in psychobiology at Stony Brook State University in New York. After that, he began to work as a postdoc fellow at the neurology department of Cornell University Medical College, where he became an associate professor in 1989. Later that year, LeDoux moved to the Center for Neuroscience at New York University, where he was appointed professor in 1991 and became university professor in 2005. He became also professor of child and adolescent psychiatry and normal psychiatry. In addition to his position at New York University, he has been the founding director of the Emotional Brain Institute, a part of the Nathan Klein Institute, where he retired in 2023. LeDoux has received numerous awards and is highly respected in the field of neuroscience. LeDoux is also an active writer. He wrote 9 books that explore emotion, fear, consciousness, and the brain. I will mention some of his books later in my presentation. LeDoux's major lines of research. In the 1970s, when doing his PhD under supervision of Michael Gazzaniga, he was researching on split brain patients. It was actually at this time that he became interested in emotional research and consciousness studies. Mapping the neural circuits of fear is really his main line of research. For this, he used lesion studies, electrophysiology, pharmaceutical manipulations, and anatomical tracing. He identified the critical role of the amygdala in processing of fear. In his dual pathway model, he was able to distinguish between cortical and subcortical neural pathways into the amygdala. In his most highly cited paper, Emotion Circuits in the Brain, he criticizes the traditional limbic system theory for being too vague, replacing it also with a clear, empirically grounded evidence about the neural circuits of emotion. Fear memory. So LeDoux discovered synaptic plasticity in the amygdala. And in collaboration with Nader, LeDoux revived and proved memory reconsolidation. This was a paradigm shift. I will discuss this later in detail. He also found that the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, as you can see in the picture, plays a critical role in regulating fear responses. LeDoux bridges the gap between basic neuroscience and clinical psychology. In this article, LeDoux explains the important distinction between automatic threat responses seen in animals and the subjective experience of fear unique to humans. This distinction is important if we want to translate animal research to human application, for instance, for treating anxiety, trauma, PTSD. LeDoux also collaborated with a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists. LeDoux's theoretical contributions to the debates on consciousness and the self. LeDoux has been developing the higher order theory of emotional consciousness since the 1970s. This is something I will discuss later. The book's Synaptic Self and the Deep History of Ourselves gives a good idea about LeDoux's line of thinking. He argues that our self, personal identity, and conscious experiences are deeply rooted in biological processes, specifically in the synaptic activities of the brain. Let's look at LeDoux's bibliometric analysis. I compared Google Scholar with Web of Science. Google Scholar showed 471 publications, total citations of just over 128,000 and an H-index of 150. The Web of Science showed 305 publications, total citations of 54,140 and an H-index of 110. Here you can see the titles of the 3 highest cited publications. In Google Scholar, The Emotional Brain, it is a book with close to 20,000 citations. And then there are 2 review articles on emotion circuits. In the Web of Science, there are additionally 2 experimental articles, one that bridges findings from animals to human behavior, and the other on memory reconsolidation. My selected articles. The first article presents significant findings on memory reconsolidation and had a profound impact on our understanding of how emotional memories are formed and altered. The second article, Higher Order Theory of Emotional Consciousness, offers a revolutionary perspective on how we understand emotions and their relationship to consciousness. These 2 articles present 2 complementary dimensions of LeDoux's work, and I think it will give you a nice overview. Let's jump into his first article. Fear memories require protein synthesis in the amygdala for reconsolidation after retrieval. Published in 2000 by Nader et al. In Nature with an impact factor of 50. This study investigates the molecular mechanisms of memory, particularly reconsolidation of fear memories in rats. The background of this article. It was already known that the lateral and basal nuclei of the amygdala, LBA, play a major role in fear memory. Also, inhibition of protein synthesis at the location of LBA shortly after learning prevents consolidation of fear memory. In 1986, Misaman et al. Proposed that already consolidated memories might also become unstable after retrieval and that they need reconsolidation. From this background, Nader et al. Formed their thesis. Consolidated fear memories, when reactivated, return to a labile state that requires protein synthesis in the amygdala for reconsolidation. Methodology and procedure of the study. Rats underwent auditory fear conditioning, so a tone, a conditioned stimulus, was paired with a food shock, an unconditioned stimulus. Freezing behavior was used as an index for fear learning when later a conditioned stimulus was presented. Anisomycin was infused either at a high or a low dose, and a control group received a control solution. ANOVA was applied to compare group mean results. The procedure of the study. On day 1, they trained rats by pairing a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. Then in test 1, 24 hours later, they received a single conditioned stimulus directly followed by an infusion of anisomycin or a control solution. Another control group received anisomycin without retrieval. In test 2, 24 hours later again, they received 3 conditioned stimuli. Let's look at the test results. In test 1, it is seen that a single conditioned stimulus reactivated memory because freezing occurs, seen by the black bar. This opens up the reconsolidation window. Rats that received retrieval and anisomycin showed significantly reduced freezing, indicating memory impairment. Rats that received anisomycin without retrieval showed normal freezing, meaning the memory was intact. The amnesia occurred because the memory was destabilized by reactivation and could not be reconsolidated due to blocked protein synthesis. This result is unexpected according to traditional theories, because they say blocking protein synthesis after memory retrieval should preserve the fear memory. Besides the main results, there were 3 further experiments done with some manipulations of the previous procedure. You can see this by the red boxes. I will just very shortly discuss these results. So in experiment 2, they found that reconsolidation only occurs within a time-limited window. In experiment 3, they showed there was no temporal gradient for reconsolidation. And experiment 4 showed that amnesia following anisomycin was not due to non-specific effects. Conclusion: this study provides evidence that reactivated fear memories become labile and require new protein synthesis in the amygdala to be reconsolidated. Reconsolidation, like consolidation, is protein synthesis dependent and occurs within a limited time window. The results contradict the conventional view of fear memory. The strengths of this study: the protein synthesis inhibitor was applied very specific to the LBA. And also, this study distinguishes between memory extinction and reconsolidation. The weaknesses: the findings are specific for fear memory, so it's difficult to generalize it to all memories. And also, rat studies cannot be directly translated into human. This article is a major contribution because it offers a novel perspective on the nature of memory, showing that memory is not fixed but dynamic. It opened up new fields of research on memory reconsolidation. This has a therapeutic implication because replacing memories through reconsolidation could be more effective than suppressing the original memory. Also, drugs could be developed to erase fear memory. I believe these developments are promising for the development of trauma-related disorders, but I also think, especially for development of drugs that erase memory, ethical considerations should be taken into account. Because when we start to modify memory, how responsible can we erase memory? Or what are the consequences for our identity if we erase memories? So now I will discuss my second article, A Higher Order Theory of Emotional Consciousness by Brown and LeDoux, published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2017, a journal with an impact factor of 9.4. This theoretical article argues how emotional consciousness arises from higher order cognitive processes. The background of this study. In neuroscience, it remains unclear how emotions become conscious. Traditional models of emotion link emotions directly to subcortical circuits and therefore struggle to explain subjective emotional experience. Leading consciousness theory, like higher order theory of consciousness from Rosenthal, they have explained perceptual experiences, but they also do not account for emotional experiences. This paper proposes a higher order theory of emotional consciousness, and it aims to bridge the gap between traditional theories of emotions and emerging consciousness theories. The thesis is: brain mechanisms that give rise to conscious emotional feelings are fundamentally the same as those for perceptual conscious experience. They result both from higher order processing in general networks of cognition. The difference is the input these networks process. Let's start with looking at this processing in general networks of cognition. General networks of cognition, GNC, consist of part of the frontal and parietal cortex. These areas enable working memory. These areas have been shown to become active during conscious experiences in humans for perception of stimuli like vision, but also for emotional stimuli. Next, we will look how GNC fits into the theories of consciousness. In their paper, Brown and LeDoux compared first-order theories to higher-order theories. First-order theories says that stimulus processing alone is enough for consciousness to arise, phenomenal consciousness. But higher-order theorists say that in addition, there must be awareness of the mental representation of that stimulus. This is done by a higher order representation. So the GNC makes conscious the sensory information in the visual cortex. Because the higher order theory is based on visual perception, it cannot account for emotional consciousness. So Brown and LeDoux modified this model. Two modifications were made. First, it is needed to account for absent stimuli, for instance, when we use our imagination. This process involves making a higher order representation of a representation, called a horror. Secondly, according to Brown and LeDoux, for emotions to be experienced consciously, the self must be included. So, they define the self as a collection of autobiographical memories. This can be information about who you are, what happened to you, or how do you act in a particular situation. This is called a schema. These modifications result in the horror theory. So here you see a diagram of the horror theory. An extra level is added that allows for horror. It is only at this level that consciousness arises according to Brown and LeDoux. The role of the self is included by adding autobiographical knowledge, and also factual knowledge retrieved from long-term memory is included. Now, this horror theory is the basis for the higher order theory of emotional consciousness, which we will look at next. In this diagram, HOTEX is explained. The color red is accounting for the emotional part of consciousness. Let's take an example to explain the model. When seeing a snake, input from the visual cortex together with long-term memory like facts about the snake, potential danger, they enter working memory. At the same time, subcortical survival circuits are activated and give an extra emotional input to working memory, together with emotional relevant information from long-term memory, fear schemas. All this information together blends into an emotional horror, and at this point everything is still unconscious. The emotional horror becomes then conscious when it is re-represented by an emotional self-horror. An important thing is to notice that Holtex also predicts how fear can be experienced without subcortical input, so without this part. Language and abstract thought allow humans to trigger fear schemas on a cortical level, which helps explain anxieties that occur without any external threat. So let's conclude all this. The experience of fear arises when a first order representation of a threat, together with relevant memories, forms a higher order representation in working memory. When a higher order representation of that horror is formed, the experience becomes conscious. So at this point, you understand that you are in a dangerous situation. For the fear to be emotionally experienced, the self must be included in the horror. Hotex accounts potentially for all forms of fear, fear triggered subcortically or on the higher cognitive level. Implications. Emotions can never be unconscious. If you are not aware of being afraid, you are not afraid. Also, you can never be mistaken by the emotions you are feeling. A conscious emotion is not a behavior, a physiological response, or a judgment by outsiders. It is the experience that you are having. Strengths. It explains emotional consciousness through higher order representations, and it combines emotion, memory, and cognition in a dynamic way. It also accounts for subjective experiences. Weaknesses. It is difficult to test empirically due to unclear neural mechanisms. Also, it may place too much emphasis on cognition over automatic emotion. The significance of this study. It moves emotion to the center of consciousness science. Clinically, it offers insight into how anxiety arises from internal schemas. It also gives emotion a function in that they can contribute to our decision making and actions. My own reflection, I find Hotex promising because it shows that emotions aren't just automatic reactions, but interpretations of our own inner states. This helps us better understand experiences like anxiety, and because it suggests that emotions are constructed, they can also be reconstructed, making us able to regulate our emotions instead of being a victim of our emotions. Yeah, so with this word said, I will next discuss and conclude LeDoux's overall work. I want to shortly mention some overall criticism. Much of the criticism was on oversimplification and overemphasis on the role of the amygdala and fear, suggesting it was the central or the sole player in fear. Criticism helped LeDoux move from a mechanistic model of emotion to a more integrative, consciousness-focused understanding of emotions, and this has actually been a great development in his career. So what are LeDoux's contributions to the field of neuroscience? LeDoux brought emotion research into neuroscience. He established the behavioral paradigm of fear conditioning as a method for empirical research on emotion circuits. This is now used by many other scientists. He mapped the fear circuits. He developed a dual pathway model. He discovered neuroplasticity in the amygdala, and he found experimental evidence for reconsolidation. And he also defined neural mechanisms of fear extinction. LeDoux also brought neuroscience directly into clinical treatments, which has a broad implication for society. LeDoux provided the biological explanation for why exposure therapy works, and this is the foundation of the now widespread cognitive behavioral therapy. He also found why trauma persists through the impairment of extinction, and he gave anxiety a biological explanation that helped remove stigma. He helped also uncover how anxiolytics affect fear circuits and why they often do not work. And this is because research on medications they often do not take into account subjective experience, and this is extremely important because many people are taking these medications. Last but not least, LeDoux made significant theoretical and philosophical advancements. He offered a clear conceptualization of fear as a subjective experience, and he contributed to understanding of emotions and self. He says, the self is not a fixed thing, but a narrative constructed by the brain, shaped by memory, emotion, and experience. This is important for society because it reshapes how we understand mental health, emotional suffering, and personal identity. And it has a direct implication for both clinical treatment and everyday life. Moreover, LeDoux reaches the broader public through his books, podcasts, lectures, and music. So the general public benefits from his contributions. LeDoux will officially go in retirement August this year, so future plans according to LeDoux himself. My plan is to keep writing books and music, cook new recipes and see what else comes my way. Otherwise, according to his schedule, he will still be traveling in Europe to lecture on his new book, The Four Realms of Existence. And this is actually the book that he is writing at the moment. So he is still quite busy. So Joseph LeDoux's contributions have not only advanced our understanding of the brain, but have also changed the way we think about ourselves and our emotional lives. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of the mind, we owe a great debt to pioneers like LeDoux, who have shown us the way forward. Yourself is a story written by your brain's synapses. That story can change, and so can you. Thank you for listening.